My name's Silverlock, and today I'll be taking on a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon X using only Fairy-type Pokémon. The 6th generation of games brought some major changes to the franchise, one of which was the addition of an entirely new type for the first time since the 2nd generation. But since the Fairy type was so new at the time, there weren't a lot of them at first. Even when you include older Pokemon that were given the Fairy typing, there were only 18 fully evolved Fairy types available. And when you reduce that down to what you can find in Pokemon X and exclude the legendaries, you're left with just 12 possible encounters. It's even less than that when you follow the 1 Pokemon per route rule of a Nuzlocke run, as there are a few instances where a couple Fairy types exclusively appear in just one area together. But despite that, or perhaps because of that, I thought this would be a challenging and therefore rewarding experience. So as a reminder, in addition to the typical Nuzlocke rules, I have to play on set mode, I won't be allowed to use healing items in battle, and there will be level caps in place based on the level of a boss trainer's ace. So with all of that out of the way, let's start the run. Naturally, none of the starters are or will become Fairy type, but I go ahead and pick Chespin, so Serena will pick Fennekin. It's the one starter that can resist Fairy type attacks, which could end up giving my team a slight disadvantage, and thus more of a challenge. Theoretically. That's because our true starter, which we'll find on Route 3, is an Azurill. I name her Undyne, and she'll eventually become part Water type. I'm also fortunate that she comes with a huge power ability. So just like that, we flip the script against Serena for the rest of the run. But that alone won't get us through the first gym battle, which Undyne has to do solo at this point. Thankfully, as a baby Pokemon, her evolution is happiness-based, so after skating around for a while, she'll eventually become happy enough to evolve into Marill. And by evolving right at level 10, she can learn Charm, Rollout, and Defense Roll, the latter two being the perfect combination to take on Viola and her bug types. I start the battle using Defense Curl, which has the bonus effect of increasing the power of Rollout. The first hit nearly takes out Surskit right away, but then she misses the second turn. So we end up having to start a new Rollout that takes Surskit out on the next turn, but even after Vivillon uses Harden to boost her defense, the second Rollout hit is still more than enough to take it down in a single hit, giving us an easy solo sweep and earning us our first badge. But now that we can move on to Route 4, I'm forced to make the first of some important decisions regarding viable encounters for this run. On this route in particular, I can either catch a Flabebe or Ralts, and while Flabebe can be caught later on Route 7, this is the only place where Ralts can be found. And the odds of Ralts even appearing are much lower compared to Flabebe. I could skip this area for now, then grab a Flabebe from Route 7. Doing so would guarantee a Ralts, but then I would miss out on another Route 7 encounter, Swirlix. Admittingly, Swirlix isn't really considered a must-have encounter by most people, but I kinda see some hidden potential with this sweet boy. I've also never used one in any playthrough of mine before, so I'm kinda curious what it can do in this Nuzlocke run. So I go ahead and make the decision to catch Titania the Flabebe right away, which means I'll have to miss out on a potential Gardevoir for this run. So after figuring that out, we make our way to Lumio City, and after the fight with Sycamore, which is made way too easy after teaching Undyne Return, she evolves into a Azumarill. And after another exciting episode of solving the mundane problems of the 1%ers, we can move on to Route 7 to pick up the previously mentioned Swirlix, who I named Kushi. And yes, that is how you pronounce it. After that, Titania evolves into Floette, and after running back and forth within the Glittering Cave for almost an hour, I finally run into a Mawile, who I name Leonon. Mawile isn't what you would call a good Pokemon, at least in terms of base stats, but with Intimidate, Fairy Steel typing, and a Mega Evolution, she could still have a major role to play. Is what I would say if her Mega Stone wasn't locked to the post-game. There's a lot that could be said about how X and Y handled access to Mega Evolution during the main story, and not much of it is good. We finally arrive in Silage City, but before we take on the next gym, I go ahead and grab the Whip to Dream, and with some help from my totally real uncle who totally works at Nintendo, Kushi can evolve into Slurpuff. I also make a quick stop north to Route 10, where I'm faced with a 50-50 chance for one of two possible encounters, a Snubble or Eevee. Personally, I'd prefer a Snubble at this point, but alas, my first encounter ends up being an Eevee. I do realize in hindsight that I could have rigged the encounter in my favor using the Repel trick, since Snubble can appear at a higher level than Eevee in the Yellow Flowers. But regardless, Sylveon is still a pretty decent Pokemon to have on hand. So after a lot of petting, playing games, and stuffing his face with pastries, Oberon can evolve into Sylveon. Now that I've assembled a respectable team, we can finally take on the next gym battle against Grant and his rock types. Although I'd hardly call it a battle. Undyne, as previously mentioned, ends up being more than capable of completely annihilating his 2 unevolved fossils with just a few Aqua Tails. That's a predictably easy badge number 2 acquired. Next, I make my way to Route 11, where we can find a Dedenne, who I name Pixie. This cute Pika cousin may seem underwhelming at first, especially since she comes with a pickup ability instead of the more useful cheek pouch, but a Fairy Electric type combo will definitely come in handy in certain fights later in the game. But in the Reflection Cave, I'm faced with another limited choice in encounters. It's the only area where we can find both Mr. Mime and Carbink. But unlike the 2 previous situations, there's no way to ensure one encounter over the other here, as far as I know. I would have preferred Carbink for its defensive stats and utility, but unfortunately Mr. Mime has a slightly higher chance to appear, and that's who I'm left with. Hob the Mr. Mime joins the team. And with a speed-lowering nature too. Awesome. But it's not like he'll be completely necessary right away. Oberon easily takes care of Serena by himself in the Tower of Mastery, and then shortly after that we go up against Karina and her fighting types. And this time, it's Kushi's turn to show us what he's made of. At this stage of the game, a Slurpuff is pretty bulky, and with Draining Kiss, he can hit super effectively and keep himself healthy. A held Rocky Helmet also helps tack on some extra damage, and with all of that combined, he has no issue taking down Karina's Mienfoo, Machoke, and Hawlucha to give us another effortless win. These early game gyms have been a breeze so far, but from here on out, things start getting a little tougher. Our next stop is on Route 12, where I can hop on a Skiddo in order to find the shiny stone needed to evolve Titania. I decide to hold off on evolving her for now, as she won't be a huge necessity to take on the next gym challenge against Ramos and his grass types. Leonon starts by intimidating his Jumpluff, which lets her better take an itemless acrobatics, then connects with a super effective Rock Tomb. Jumpluff then sets up Leaf Seed on the next turn, as a second Rock Tomb brings it into the red. This causes Ramos to heal with a Hyper Potion, so I take this time to go for a Power-Up Punch to boost Leonon's attack, and thanks to the 2 speed drops, Leonon is now faster, meaning Jumpluff can only get off 1 more acrobatics before going down with the strength. She's able to stay above half health thanks to her held Citrus Berry, but after Ramos sends out his ace Go-Goat, I begin to rethink keeping her in. So I decide to pivot to Kushi, who tanks a Bulldoze coming in, then Go-Goat starts going for Takedown while I have Kushi use Draining Kiss. The recoil from Takedown plus Rocky Helmet Chip does a great job at chipping away at Go-Goat's HP, while the healing from Draining Kisses is just enough to keep up with the damage. And even after Ramos uses another Hyper Potion, Kushi could just do enough to just stay alive, while Go-Goat eventually takes itself out after a final takedown. Last is Weeping Bell, but after switching over to Hob, he's able to take it down with just a single Psybeam. Despite being our first fight that actually required some effort, we still made it through unscathed, winning us badge number 4. After an uneventful thrashing of Team Flare at the Kalos power plant, I finally decide to use the shiny stone to evolve Titania into Florges, and I do so now because the next gym battle against Clement is pretty much guaranteed to be trickier to get through, which I'll explain as we go along. I start with Pixie against her cousin Emolga, and thanks to it being part flying type, her electric attacks can hit it neutrally. After opening with a parabolic charge and resisting an aerial ace, a Volt Switch the following turn is enough to take it down without a fuss. The Volt Switch allows me to bring in Titania for free against Clement's Magneton, and this is where we need to be careful. His Magneton will always try to set up electric terrain to boost his team's electric attacks, and leaving it on the field when his Heliolisk comes out will put us in a not so ideal position. So the trick here is to properly time taking out his Magneton after electric terrain goes away, while doing our best to stay alive. And this is where Titania comes in. With her sky-high special defense, a Wish and Protect combo, and held leftovers, she can continuously heal while slowly chipping away with Nature Power. With electric terrain on the field, Nature Power actually turns into Thunderbolts, and it gets the damage boost along with it, which is actually super helpful. The problem is, since we didn't take things slow at the start, Clement has 2 Hyper Potions to heal his Magneton. This drags out the battle enough that I start to worry about PP management. On top of that, Magneton also goes for Mirror Shot every now and then, which ends up lowering her accuracy a couple times. This means eventually I have to resort to a less effective but 100% accurate Magical Leaf in order to actually hit it. But by alternating between Wish, Protect, and Magical Leaf when I can, we can end up timing things just right and take Magneton down before it can re-add electric terrain. That means that Heliolisk won't be able to do nearly as much damage, and because there's no one on my team that can outspeed it, it's definitely a game changer. I initially keep Titania in, but a second Thunderbolt does manage to paralyze her. But this queen has definitely gone above and beyond already, so I have her tank just one more Thunderbolt that brings her into the red in order to get off one final wish, then I switch to Oberon. Her last wish recovers the damage from a Thunderbolt coming in, but then the next one ends up paralyzing again. Except I had Oberon hold a Cherry Berry. He recovers, and after a couple Moonblasts, Heliolisk goes down, winning us a somewhat tedious, but hard-earned 5th gym badge. After another fairly uneventful battle against Serena, we make our way to Laver City, where I finally take the time to swap out my clothes for a style that's more chromatically appropriate for not only the run, but for our next gym battle against Valerie and her own fairy types. I start with having Undyne bulldoze Mawile into the red, while the Crunch does very little damage, but it does get the defense drop. Valerie uses a Hyper Potion on the next turn, but then Undyne's next bulldoze ends up getting a critical hit, giving us an easy knockout. Next is Mr. Mime, who sets up a Reflect, meaning Undyne's Aqua Tail only does over half instead of outright killing it. The Psychic the next turn does some decent damage, but the next Aqua Tail connects to take Mr. Mime down. Last is Sylveon, and I switch to Titania to help us stall out the remaining turns of Reflect, then I go for Nature Power, which turns into Tri-Attack, to fish for a lucky status effect. But after Sylveon lands a critical hit Dazzling Gleam, I switch gears and set up a Wish as Reflect goes away, then switch back to Undyne. Wish takes effect, bringing her back above half health, and with Reflect gone, I go for Aqua Tail, but Sylveon ends up just barely surviving. Another Dazzling Gleam brings Undyne back below half, and now I have to switch again while Valerie uses her second Hyper Potion. So this time I bring in my own Sylveon for a mirror match. Oberon sets up a light screen first to give us a bit of protection, and then we start Moonblasting. Since Oberon is able to outdamage her, he just needs to land a few Moonblasts until Valerie's Sylveon goes down, winning us our 6th gym badge. We win the Dazzling Gleam TM, which will help give my team a bit more firepower. And we immediately put it to good use by routing Team Flare from the Pokeball Factory, and then we move forward through Route 15 to the Lost Hotel. There I can find a new encounter, a Klefki who I name Puck. This little ring of jangly keys used to entertain and distract babies happens to have one of the best typings in the game, and actually has usable stats, unlike a certain other Steel-type fairy. And after yet another easy win against Serena, we're already taking on our next gym battle against Olympia and her Psychic types. Pixie starts off strong by taking out her Sigilith with a single Thunderbolt, then her Slowking tries to sub with Calm Mind, but a couple more Thunderbolts take it down just as easily. That already leaves her ace Meowstic, who after doing a little bit of damage with Fake Out, tries to sub with Calm Mind as well, but after having Pixie Volt switch over to Undyne, it's not going to make a difference. A boosted Psychic can bring her down below half, but Undyne just needs to connect with an Aqua Tail to wrap up an easy gym victory and obtain our 7th badge. But before we can move on to the next gym, we need to deal with Team Flare and their crazy genocidal shenanigans. Is it just me, or could they have just won outright if they didn't announce their entire plan to the world? Either way, we head back to Lumio City to infiltrate their secret base, and this is where we begin the first 3 fights against Lysander. My strategy for the first one ends up being pretty simple. I lead with Hob, who starts off by taking down Lysander's Mienfoo with a single Psychic. Then his Gyarados goes down to a single quad-effective Thunderbolt after Hob somehow survives a strong Aqua Tail. Murkrow threatens to outspeed, so I switch to Undyne on a weak Foul Play, who can take it down the next turn with a Play Rough. Last is Pyroar, but a wimpy Fire Blast doesn't stop Undyne from getting another one-hit KO with an Aqua Tail. Just like I said, pretty simple. After that, we fight our way through the hideout and make it through the multiple admin fights in one piece, then head to Geosenge Town for the second Lysander fight. His entire team is now fully evolved, so I end up going with a different strategy. This time I lead with Kushi, who can easily resist Mienshau's high jump kick, then drastically increase his defense with Cotton Guard. I go for a second one on the next turn, which puts him at max defense. This means nothing except for a critical hit can put a dent in this pink frosted cupcake. After some Rocky Helmet chip damage, a single Draining Kiss can easily take Mienshao down, while nearly healing him back to full health. Gyarados is next, and while Kushi's Draining Kisses don't do much in terms of damage, its healing is just enough to keep up with the damage from multiple super effective Iron Heads. Add on some Rocky Helmet chip, and Gyarados eventually goes down, along with Lysander's Honchkrow not too long after. But since his Pyroar is a special attacker, Kushi's maxed out defense won't be much help anymore. He can take one strong Fire Blast and retaliate with Surf to bring Pyroar down to about a third, but now I have to switch to Undyne. She still has to tank a couple more Fire Blasts, and while she does end up getting burned, she can easily hang on to finish the fight with a couple more Bulldozes. And then not too long after stuffing the literal source of all life energy into a Master Ball, we're down to the third and final Lysander fight. Only this time, we have a Mega Gyarados to contend with. We begin with virtually the same strategy as before. Kushi maximizes his defense with Cotton Guard, while Mienshao keeps taking Rocky Helmet Chip, eventually going down to a Draining Kiss. The same goes for Honchkrow, going down with a couple more Draining Kisses, but since his Mega Evolved Gyarados is set to come out last, we're forced to take on Pyroar next, which means our Cotton Guard strategy has to end early. I do keep him in one more turn again to tank a Fire Blast and let loose a Surf that brings it down to below a fourth before I have to switch to Undyne. But she still has to tank 2 more Fire Blasts that bring her below half before she could finally take Pyro down with the Bulldoze. That leaves her in an unideal condition as Gyarados takes the field. I make an extremely risky move and keep Undyne in, but her Quick Claw activates, allowing her to ensure she can get off a charm that lowers Gyarados' attack before it Mega Evolves. This works out perfectly, as the resulting Earthquake ends up doing some pathetic damage. But Undyne still isn't able to stay in, and even after the attack drop, another Earthquake still deals some decent damage to Hob. This is expected given Hob's low defense, but my intention of bringing him in was to have him outspeed and set up a Reflect to help whoever I send out next. Never mind the fact that I had previously pointed out that Hob has a speed-lowering nature, and Aqua Tail connects, taking Hob down, giving us our first death of the run. I bring Kushi back in, and you might ask why, since he's at pretty low health. But unlike Hob, Kushi has a higher speed, meaning he can outspeed and land a Draining Kiss. He heals just enough back that an Iron Head essentially deals the same exact amount of damage. Thanks to his held Rocky Helmet, that means we can outdamage, and a second Draining Kiss on the following turn is enough to take Mega Gyarados down, winning us our third and final Lysander match, but at a cost. And a run with a limited number of viable encounters to begin with, one loss can deal a huge blow to our chances of making it through to the end. But despite losing Hob, my team at this point has become a well-oiled machine, which is made very clear in the gauntlet of battles against my so-called friends. First up is Shauna, whose Delcatty has no hope of doing any meaningful damage to Kushi, thanks to 2 Cotton Guards and a held leftovers. It goes down easy after a couple surfs, but then Guja comes out next. After Draining Kiss only does about a third, she responds with a strong, super effective Sludge Wave. Another Draining Kiss definitely won't heal back enough to survive a second Sludge Wave, so I switch to Puck, who can completely negate it thanks to his Steel typing. A Play Rough on the next turn takes Guja down, and a second ends up taking down her Greninja in a single hit, giving us our first win. Next up is Tierno, who doesn't give us a chance to heal, so Kushi starts off with just 68 HP against a super fast Talonflame. So I bring in Pixie, who can easily resist a couple strong acrobatics before a Parabolic Charge just barely doesn't take it down, but it does heal her back to nearly full health. A Volt Switch on the following turn takes out Talonflame, allowing me to bring Titania in before Tierno sends out Roserade. For some reason I thought that being on the bridge would change Nature Power to something usable, but instead it becomes Energy Ball, which barely does any damage. That's on me for not double checking beforehand. It's not a huge setback though, as Roserade's only move is Petal Dance, which while strong, Titania can easily handle. A resisted Dazzling Gleam can't do much, and then I go for a Protect the following turn to wait out the third and final hit of Petal Dance. This leaves Roserade with Confusion, as I go for a Wish Protect combo to heal. It actually ends up hitting itself in Confusion for the next 3 straight turns, and with a few more Dazzling Gleams along with it, Roserade finally goes down. That just leaves Crawdaunt, but one final super effective Dazzling Gleam is more than enough to get the one-hit KO, giving us win number 2. That just leaves Trevor, who is gracious enough to fully heal my team beforehand. A Thunderbolt from his Raichu can only do about a third, and Kushi's Draining Kiss is able to heal back most of the damage. A second Thunderbolt manages to paralyze, but he fights through to land a second Draining Kiss that gets a critical hit. He survives one last Thunderbolt, then manages to fight through paralysis a second time to take Raichu out. Next is Florges, so I bring in Puck, who can easily resist 2 Moonblasts before taking her down with a couple Play Roughs. That just leaves Aerodactyl, who manages to connect with a Supersonic, but Puck fights through the confusion to land another Play Rough that brings Aerodactyl below half. I then decide to pivot to Undyne, who ends up getting taken up to the sky with a Sky Drop, but the damage after landing in the next turn is kinda pathetic. An Aqua Tail connects, and Aerodactyl falls, giving us our third and final Gauntlet win. Before we take on the 8th and final gym, I have to make a quick pit stop at the Pokemon Village, where we can find our final encounter, a Jigglypuff who I named Sylph. I go ahead and evolve her into Wigglytuff, but at this point, she doesn't really add much to the team. Her jolly nature doesn't do her any favors, and Wigglytuff isn't really a good enough Pokemon at this late in the game to make much of an impact. I go ahead and include her in the team for our final gym battle against Wulfric and his Ice types, but she doesn't even end up coming into play. Kushi starts us off by roasting Wolfric's Abomasto with a quad effective flamethrower, but then he gets confused by a Confuse Ray from Cryogonal on the next turn. He hits himself in confusion, but manages to shake it off by the next turn. But after a strong super effective flash cannon and hail damage leave him with less than a fourth, his next flamethrower just barely doesn't do half to Cryogonal, so he has to come out. I switch to Undyne, who can take neutral damage to a flash cannon thanks to her part water typing, and while she also gets confused by a Confuse Ray, she manages to fight through right away and land a waterfall to knock it out. Last up is Avalugg, so I try going for Charm, but Undyne ends up hitting herself as Avalugg starts setting up with Curse. She ends up pulling through on the next turn and can start lowering its attack as Avalugg continues cursing, which evens things out. Another Charm and Curse put it at -1 attack, and then a final Charm brings it down to -3, meaning that when it finally goes for an Avalanche, its reduced damage means it's safe enough to bring Titania in. But then I get ahead of myself and misclick on Nature Power, which turns into a resistant Ice Beam that doesn't do much. Another Avalanche ends up doing some decent damage despite the attack drops, so I have to run our usual Wish Protect protocol to bring Titania back up to snuff. Once that's done, a Dazzling Gleam brings it down to a sliver, and after Wolfric heals with a Hyper Potion, a couple more Dazzling Gleams can seal the deal, winning us our 8th and final badge. With all 8 badges in tow, we can finally make our way through Victory Road, and after thrashing Serena one more time, we eventually arrive at the Pokemon League. After making some final adjustments, I believe my team is fully prepared to take on the Elite Four challenge. Granted, this Elite Four are often considered the weakest in the series, since they only have teams of 4 instead of the usual 5, but they do compensate to an extent by having some strong Pokemon, and with a limited pool of available encounters for this run, they could still present a good challenge for the team. So, let's see what we can do. I have the privilege of choosing the order we take on the Elite Four, so I decided to take on Drasna and her Dragon types, the easiest matchup for my team. I lead with Puck against Dragalge, my only team member who can completely negate its stab sludge bombs that would otherwise threaten the rest of my team. I start by paralyzing it with Thunder Wave, but it manages to fight through to land a Thunderbolt. A neutral hitting Play Rough can't quite bring it below half HP, and it fights Paralysis a second time, hitting with another strong Thunderbolt. The odds of getting full paralysis continue to not go in our favor, and then Puck and Dragalge are left with just a sliver of health each. This means Drasna can use a full restore to fully heal, and though I keep Puck in one more turn to do a bit of damage with another Play Rough, I'm now at a bit of a disadvantage. I need to make sure that whoever I switch to can survive a hit and take Dragalge down, or risk a strong Sludge Wave. My best bet is Undyne, who luckily gets hit with an ineffective Surf instead of a Sludge Wave or Thunderbolts. I go for Bulldoze, and Dragalge goes down. With our team's biggest threat out of the way, Undyne can get to work. Altaria goes down in a single hit, and after Noivern flinches with an Air Slash, then goes for an ineffective Flamethrower for some reason, Noivern 2 goes down in a single hit. Last is Druddigon, and I first decide to play it safe by going for a Charm to lower its attack. Drasna's Druddigon is built around Retaliation, and I was scared that Undyne's next Play Rough would miss or fail to take it out. But a Play Rough on the next turn ends up just taking it down in a single hit, again. Just like that, we got our first Elite Four victory. Next up is Seabold, and now it's Pixie's time to shine. She manages to land a critical hit Thunderbolt on Clawitzer right at the start, and then his Gyarados predictably goes down to a single Thunderbolt as well. Barbaracle is bulky enough to survive another Thunderbolt in the red, and retaliates with a strong Stone Edge which thankfully doesn't crit. Seabold uses a full restore, but this just gives Pixie the opportunity to heal with a Parabolic Charge. A second one takes Barbaracle down, bringing Pixie back to nearly full HP as Starmie comes out last. It's still a bit of a risk keeping Pixie in, but although Starmie outspeeds, it just sets up a light screen, meaning Pixie can Volt Switch out, bringing Undyne in. The Psychic does some decent damage, but there's nothing that can get in the way of a huge power Play Rough from Undyne. Starmie goes down, giving us another easy Elite Four victory. Next is Malva and her Fire types, and I have Pixie start us off again. Her role this time is to simply outspeed and do as much damage with a Thunderbolt as possible, hopefully survive a hit, then Volt Switch out. But instead, Pyroar ends up getting paralyzed. Pixie does manage to hang on after a strong Flamethrower, but Pyroar isn't at the threshold to be healed with a full restore, so I can safely keep Pixie in to finish it off with another Thunderbolt. This gives Pixie another turn to deal some damage to Torkoal, then switch over to Undyne. She tanks an Earthquake coming in, then a Waterfall the next turn takes Torkoal down. And with Undyne safely on the field, there's not much else Smallville can do to us. Her Talonflame is fast, but a resisted Flare Blitz can't do much to stop Undyne. A Waterfall takes it down in a single hit, and while Chandelure tries to do something with Confuse Ray, Undyne just fights through. It too goes down easy with another Waterfall, giving us our third Elite Four win. But last up is Wickstrom and his steel types, which is my team's biggest weakness. But we have a few tricks up our sleeves to get through. First, Pixie once again starts us off against Wickstrom's Klefki. Thanks to her part electric typing, she won't take super effective damage from steel type attacks. Not that it actually matters. His Klefki just sets up spikes on the first turn, before going down to a couple Thunderbolts. Probopass is next, so I have Pixie Volt switch over to, you guessed it, Undyne. She takes a bit of damage from an Earth Power, but manages to land a critical hit to take it down. Next up is Scizor, and she gets another critical hit. This brings Scizor down to the red, but a neutral hitting Ironhead still does a ton of damage. At the very least, Wickstrom will need to take this turn to use his full restore, so for now, I keep Undyne in to go for another waterfall that brings Scizor back below half. Scizor goes down to another waterfall, and that just leaves us with Aegislash. I switch to Puck on a failed King's Shield, but in order to take Aegislash down, it needs to be in sword form so its defense is flipped. I go for Thunder Wave to paralyze, but Aegislash fights through, switches forms, then connects with an Ironhead, and Puck survives. But if it goes for King's Shield to revert to its shield form, we might be in trouble. I go ahead and click on Foul Play, and Aegislash stays in sword form. Foul Play uses its own attack against its own defense, meaning our jingly set of keys took down one of the team's biggest threats in a single hit. With that, we have our final Elite Four win under our belts, and a full and healthy team heading into the fight against the champion Diantha. She's often considered one of the weaker champions in the series, but there are no guarantees in a Nuzlocke run. Let's see if my team of weird fairies can finish the run on a strong note. Once again for the final time, Pixie takes the lead, and after Hawlucha tries to set up with a Sword Dance, a single Volt Switch is enough to take her down. This lets me bring in Kushi for free, as Diantha sends out her Tyrantrum next. I start our usual strategy of going for 2 Cotton Guards to max out his defense, as Tyrantrum just misses 2 head smashes in a row. A Draining Kiss brings him down to about a fourth, as a third head smash finally manages to connect, and basically do nothing while taking extra Rocky Helmet damage. This causes Diantha to use her first full restore, and another Draining Kiss brings Tyrantrum down below half, but instead of just finishing it off, I decide to go for a resisted Flamethrower in order to bait Diantha to use her next full restore. Which doesn't work, because its next head smash induced recoil, and Rocky Helmet Chip just finishes it off. Whatever, I'll take it. Aurorus is next, and I go for a super effective Surf that manages to crit, but it survives and sets up a Reflect. A second Surf does take it down, and a Goodra comes out next. The next few turns are spent trading off Draining Kisses and Fire Blasts, until Goodra is brought into the red, forcing Diantha to heal with their second full restore. This gives Kushi a chance to connect with more Draining Kisses to heal up, which ends up putting him ahead of Goodra in damage output, allowing him to survive and finally take Goodra down. Second to last is Gourgeist, who takes a good chunk of damage from a Flamethrower, but it goes for Trick or Treat, which changes Kushi's typing to Ghost. In order to prepare for Diantha's last Pokemon, I want to make sure that whichever one I have out doesn't have the Ghost typing, so I won't be forced to switch at that point. So I pivot to Oberon, as Diantha uses her third and final full restore. Gourgeist heals up, then outspeeds the next turn and uses Trick or Treat again. Without Stab, Oberon's Moonblast just barely doesn't get a one-hit KO, so I need to switch again. This time I bring in Puck, as Gourgeist goes for a Phantom Force, and because of that, Gourgeist can avoid Puck's first attack, then hit for about a third. But then Puck can connect with a Foul Play on the next turn, and avoid another Trick or Treat. And with that, we're now down to Diantha's final Pokemon, Gardevoir. She Mega Evolves as I go for a Thunder Wave, hoping for a full Paralysis, but she fights through it to let off a Thunderbolt that brings Puck down to just 33 HP. With this being the final fight, it wouldn't be a bad strategy to sacrifice one of my Pokemon to get a safe switch, but this time, I don't feel like that's necessary. I switch to Titania, who tanks a Thunderbolt, but ends up getting paralyzed as well. Nonetheless, both of them can fight through and connect with both of their Moonblasts. I have Titania protect the next turn to get some leftovers recovery, then we once again ignore Paralysis to exchange 2 more Moonblasts. Titania manages to get a critical hit, but it's still not enough to take her down, so I switch to Oberon, who can land the final blow. And as it turns out, Diantha actually has a 4th full restore. This is starting to get ridiculous. So all that effort from Titania didn't mean much, but we're still not done. After a Moonblast does about a third and lowers his special attack, I have Oberon set up a light screen to give the team some more breathing room. I decide to keep Oberon in one more turn to let loose his own Moonblast, but thanks to that special attack drop, it doesn't end up doing much. So I have to switch again, this time to Undyne. With Oberon's light screen in place, she can survive another Moonblast and a super effective Thunderbolt. This gives her the opportunity to connect with one final waterfall, enough to finally take down Mega Gardevoir. With that, Diantha is defeated, and I have officially completed a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon X using only fairy types. This playthrough ended up being a bit more fun than I had anticipated. I've always enjoyed having a good number of options when it comes to viable encounters in my runs, but there's also a lot of fun to be had when you have to make do with a very limited selection. Some Pokemon you might have overlooked in the past for seeming too weak or difficult to use might end up being the perfect answer to some tough fights. And in the end, doesn't that fit the spirit of a Nuzlocke run? So if you enjoyed this run, please don't hesitate to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any suggestions on what kind of challenges you'd like to see in the future, please feel free to drop a comment below. I've been enjoying a lot of these comments on my videos lately, so don't hesitate to leave your thoughts or critiques, as long as they're constructive. And with that, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.